So, okay, this is how this all came about. Uh, so Fred Amrine and I have become, we're friends, and so we've become a kind of a team. He retranslates books by Rudolf Steiner, and I write the introduction. So we've done this now with the Gospel of John, and I insisted that I wasn't ready to do that, and they should get, a scripture scholar or something or other. And despite that, they said I should do it. And now this is the background to the Gospel of St. Mark, which I didn't know very well. I guess I'm a John and Luke person. But anyway, I think maybe lots of people are, but it's a wonderful set of lectures. And so I have written an introduction, and I was tempted to send it to you all, but then when I started to return to it after about 2 months, I was not pleased with it. I made a dozen corrections, and then I still wasn't pleased. I mean, substantially it's okay, but it needs improvement. So you'll see it in the front of a Steiner book, Rudolf Steiner Press book on the Gospel of John. Now I'm writing, and it's sort of spinning in my head because in these last few weeks I've been on and off working on the Steiner's lectures on the Gospel of Mark. All right, and they are quite similar, but not entirely similar. They have different topics, and I may mention some of them. I'm not sure. So here's what I'd like to do. I have 10 pages of notes, and I promise you I will not read them or even insist on looking down every page. What I would like to do, perhaps unorthodoxly, is give you some idea of what seems to be important in these lectures. And then, knowing that you have some guidelines or an introduction to to the major themes, with the time remaining, I have no idea how long it will be, but I'll be in 30 minutes. I will then turn the pages and pick out something that I think would be interesting for you. Okay, so this cycle of 10 lectures, 1911, October to June 1910 to June 1911, the very time that Rudolf Steiner was breaking with the Theosophical Society. And you will see that there's some hints of that, or more than hints, in these lectures. He definitely has his eye on the controversy. And I think we can picture that audience were almost all Theosophists. And they all, therefore, had a stronger relationship to Krishna or to Buddha or to both than to Christ. So this is a very strong set of lectures on the unique status, nature, mission, importance of Christ. It's some of the strongest statements I have read are in this set of lectures. It's also very strong with respect to the evolution of consciousness, not as systematic as the esoteric science, which is about 100 pages, same length, I think, as Stuart Easton's completely wonderful 100 pages on the evolution of consciousness in Man and World, a book that should be republished after 50 years, but with a new title. So I got onto that because, yes, this is an important theme in these lectures. Again and again, he says, he brings us back to how, to the early time, and then he really focuses on the fourth post-Atlantean epoch and the great emergence and struggle for a new paradigm, a new way of seeing, a new way of thinking. And it's also a low point. It's he says several times, I think, at least my notes say several times, that Rudolf Steiner says that the incarnation, the mystery of Golgotha, happened when humanity was least receptive. I think this is quite important, that we know that it wasn't a smooth transition. It was a struggle. Now, in other places, and also in Rowan Barfield, we know that the I'll tell you another reference too. The evolution of consciousness at this time can be seen as a deterioration of clairvoyance, or the relationship of spirit and matter, and the spirituality of almost everything is in jeopardy. At the same time, and for that reason, there is a dramatic, even amazing, worldwide attempt to recover what was lost. So there's in the front of Carl Jasper's book, the Origin and End. I think it's Origin and End anyway. He talks about the axial age, and in just these really become kind of classic pages that so often is referred to, he talks about the attempt to bring about the very reversal that Rudolf Steiner, and for that matter Barfield, have described in so many lectures and writings, namely the attempt to get a systematic, reliable paradigm to make up or to recover what was lost. So around the globe, in approximately the 6th, 5th, 4th century, in Greece, there's this fabulous emergence and celebration of philosophy, all the way from Pythagoras and Heraclitus and Parmenides to Socrates, to Plato, to Aristotle. It's an amazing sequence of genius, desperate to recover what had been possible clairvoyantly, and now, and in mystery schools, now becomes possible by thinking. And you can, if you read Socrates or Plato, well, you can't read Socrates, but if you read Plato's Socrates before you read Plato's Plato, you can see how they're desperate to get it clear, to hold to get the cosmos and the human, and to get some kind of a criterion. It's really very dramatic. And then, of course, in Persia, there's the whole Zoroaster stream. In India, there's the Bhagavad Gita, there's Buddha, there's Mahavira. It's another amazing explosion of spiritual genius, with these great texts that survive, as they should, and continue to inspire us. And then in China, there's Confucius and Lao Tzu, two of the great figures that continue to guide that ancient and wise, though problematic, civilization, always fighting about authority and power. And that's what Socrates, and that's what Confucius and Lao Tzu were talking about. Don't let those people get too much power. And Confucius's solution was make sure they honor the family, make sure they honor ritual and community and cooperation. And Lao Tzu says, make sure they honor the interior, make sure that they have an aesthetic sense, and that they honor the Tao, the mother, the source of all, the transformer, etc. So all around the world, there is this explosion. And in this lecture, Rudolf Steiner, actually, it must be 5 times, talks about how this is the sort of the ripe and necessary time for the incarnation and the coming of the Christ in through Jesus, through the mother, and then through Jesus of Nazareth, and to bring about the possibility of the I and human individuality, human freedom. He's very definite and emphatic that humanity is able to the extent that it is able to think freely. It is able to think freely because of the mystery of Golgotha. It's very, very clear in these lectures. When he talks about Christ in these lectures, he talks very definitely about Christ coming for all humans and the earth. So he makes a pretty strong contrast between the universal mission of Christ, or the cosmic Christ, leave it at that, and the Christ of religion, the Christ of Christianity. It's he doesn't reject anything, but he makes it pretty clear that if you don't think about Christ universally, that you're missing the true significance of the mystery of Golgotha. And I'm, just to be personal about this, I'm so conscious of religious denominations that I'm familiar with who seem focused on Jesus and not on Christ. It's like they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. It's it's too deep. It's too complicated. It's too something. So they just smush them together. And here we are in Advent, getting ready for Christmas. And they say it's the birth of Jesus Christ. And no awareness at all of what Steiner is trying to say, and trying to say emphatically that Jesus is the necessary preparation for the incarnation at the baptism. And every now and if I say that to somebody who hadn't thought of it before, there's a kind of wow, that's a big deal if that's true. Yeah, it's a big deal. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot in this, both in this set of lectures and in the introduction to the lectures on the Gospel of Mark. And I tend to go too fast, so I want to be sure I say the right title, about John the Baptist. Oh my goodness, if you ever had any doubt about the importance, or if you just didn't pay attention to the importance of John the Baptist. So there's a lot about Elijah and Elijah being led by an angel, and Isaiah being led by an angel, and this all leads toward John the Baptist and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it's crucial that we take in this relationship between the background to John and his role in enabling Christ to bring about the transition from the age of Aquarius to the age of Pisces, the age of the fish and the possibility of the I. Though I myself don't think cosmologically sufficiently to say very much intelligent about that. I'm reading and I'm saying, I actually don't really understand this. And maybe you do, in which case I hope you'll say so. If not, ask Brian Gray, he knows all about it. Then he has many references to Buddha and Zarathustra. And he calls Zarathustra the prophet of the northern tradition of supersensible knowledge, supersensible thinking, and Buddha, the great leader of the Southern tradition, or I guess you could say teaching and practice. Very positive statements about Buddha in this one. And every now and then you could read Rudolf Steiner talking about Buddha being somewhat life-denying, or Buddhism being life-denying, or you know, they're not really interested in transforming the world. They're more interested in getting out of the world, and that's in there somewhere. It's also in Christianity, by the way. But anyway, in this set, it's quite wonderful that he has that's the one, Zarathustra and Buddha, both sort of complementary, but it doesn't contradict his statement or statements that Christ is intended for all humanity, not just for Europe and a little something to North America. It is for all. That means China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East, etc. And so then you have to think with him about, and all this time, you know, I mean, he's not following notes. He's talking about how there is a relationship between Christ and Christianity, but Christ is not limited to Christianity. I think that's what I want to say. Not limited. So that this is, and the extent to which Christianity is possessive about Christ, that's a disservice and false to the task that Christ has set to be the transformer of all of humanity. So you get the feeling reading this lecture, I think, at least I did again and again, that well, we got a long way to go. This is not the present situation. All right, so but it's, yeah, I'll do some passages later where he says where we are and where we need to go. And then the last, the order that I'm following is not the order of the lectures. I've chosen certain themes. But the last theme concerning which Rudolf Steiner has very strong statements, I call the value of spiritual knowledge. And I'll give you some passages under that topic. And it's important for us to remind ourselves we're talking about spirituality and we're talking about knowledge. We're not talking about belief. He's very emphatic that Christianity had to go through a period, a long period actually, probably, it's hard to say the exact time, but probably 15th century, focused primarily on belief. I don't think it ended then. And then he says, but that's the beginning, the 15th century, in the fifth post-Atlantean age, when Christianity could become a religion of thinking, with a cognitive content, which makes me wonder. When Rudolf Steiner does these periods, I wonder, well, does that include so-and-so? Well, what about him, you know? So is Dante, you know, in here he talks about Homer being the great summarizer of ancient Greek culture before the fourth post-Atlantean epoch, which was all about thinking. And Homer, as we know, is the one who is on a first-name basis with gods and goddesses and interior life and archetypes, and all worked out with the beginning of conflicting or complex personality is not quite Shakespeare, but the beginning, and getting ready for then the Greek tragedies, and then he goes from there to does Homer? Then he goes. Does he go to? I guess he goes to Dante. I could be missing something. And that he says, who summarizes the Middle Ages. That's perfect. But then ask yourself, is Dante about faith or knowledge? And how does he know what he knows? And how does he say what he thinks is the case with respect to his journey from through hell to purgatory? I know, of course, he has the fabulous Beatrice, but how does she know? And so that's all very mysterious to me. And then the next one is Shakespeare, which he says is the beginner, but also almost the summarizer of the modern consciousness. And then he turns to Faust as the great. Does he say octuple? Might not be the right word, but the great truth seeker. Faust, the great truth seeker. Okay, so that's what I think is in here that I took away. It's no doubt leaving out all kinds of important themes, but I'll turn now to some passages that you might find interesting. So he begins by talking about the gospel. He begins by saying that each of the gospels makes an essential contribution. And you don't really understand the New Testament with one gospel. You must know all four because they complement each other. And I'm sure you know that he says many times about John's gospel. In the lectures on John's gospel, he talks about John's gospel being a manual for spiritual practice, spiritual development, and particularly the prologue, and which reminds me that something I had never read, but I was asked to do an hour-long presentation on Christopher Bamford, which is worth hearing because it's about Christopher Bamford. We should, you can't do much better than that. Anyway, before he began to edit anthroposophical books and become an anthroposophist, by the way, he did this fabulous introduction and translation, and also deep commentary, I would say, restatement of a book he calls The Voice of the Eagle, The Heart of Celtic Christianity. John Scotus, he always said Eriugena, original. I always said original, but I'm sure he's right. The homily on the prologue to the Gospel of John, a whole book just on those opening verses. And so here again, Rudolf Steiner begins his survey with the four, and he says that, John's Gospel is the sort of the climax, and just as Mark is the first and the briefest. So maybe I don't know why we neglect, at least I do. But it's a wonderful beginning because he goes to Isaiah and Jeremiah and talks about the prophetic prediction of the coming, the anticipating. It really is Advent. And then, of course, if you know Isaiah, it includes these fabulous verses, invocation of Isaiah with respect to John the Baptist, I think is wonderfully convincing. It's one step to the next. And he speaks about John the Baptist's initiation and how he really is the agent of that prepares the way for the transmission to a new age. Then there are many passages about the I, and I've been slow to take in a kind of experiential way that the the evolution toward the I, and then the I being the really the possibility for the kind of thinking that is right for our time. The possibility of anthroposophical thinking depends on us having that I. And of course, I've sort of known it, but I haven't thought about it. On the other hand, I have thought about how what I believe is the case, that anthroposophia makes possible the knowledge of anthroposophia. We wouldn't know about anthroposophia if anthroposophia weren't making it possible, but making it possible wouldn't be worth anything if we weren't paying attention and trying to think anthroposophia-like. It's a beautiful, recursive loop. So I have that. Now in this set of lectures, Rudolf Steiner is saying something like that about the I, and even more so in the lectures on the Gospel of the Gospel of Mark. He's saying something very similar. And now I share with you a problem that I have that you maybe can solve in the second half hour, namely that sometimes it seems, no, not sometimes, it seems to me that Rudolf Steiner talks about one topic at a time, or one being at a time. So when he's talking about Michael, I keep saying, yeah, well, where's Sophia in this? Or when I'm reading about Sophia, like in his February 3rd, 1913 lecture, which is the only one that's systematic about Sophia, I'm thinking, where's Michael in all this? And how do they both relate to Christ? And all I can say for a start of an answer is, the further up you go, the more absolute unity there is. And the further down, the more distinctiveness. And that's as far as I can go. Maybe you can help out. Here's a typical passage. The time will come when human beings will be conscious of their I. It is by self-conscious I that the secrets of the spiritual world will be unveiled. Human beings will be able to say, I penetrate into the secrets of the spiritual world through the power of the I within me. Now, that may be perfectly clear to you, but to me, it had a certain newness to it. That he says that the time is coming when Christianity and Buddhism can enter into a sort of a meaningful dialogue. Well, that is surely happening. If you don't know that, you should know that. Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King and Dalai Lama and Thomas Merton. These are fabulous dialogues at a very deep and wonderful level. And he says, Buddhism has progressed to further stages of development. Well, we know that about Christianity. Why would we be focused on what Buddha says in the Dhammapada when the whole Mahayana is about to happen, which gives us a three-bodied Buddha and a being that lends his I would say, etheric body to the birth of Jesus at the Nativity. It's not at the birth, at the Nativity. Okay, then he does the post-Atlantean epics, which you probably know and could just recite with no trouble. So let me spend the last couple of minutes on a couple of quotations here from the value of spiritual knowledge. He says there are two conditions. One is we need intellectual work to create the best possible paradigm or concepts, and we need to think in a way that's appropriate for our time and station. And then he says that's the right basis for our thinking esoterically and aiming toward the clairvoyant reading of the Akashic record. Now, that'd be a topic if you wanted to take it up. I've come more and more to think that clairvoyance is not either or. As I once heard right next to me, Owen Barfield say, "Well, I'm not a clairvoyant." And I'm thinking to myself, well, you're not, who is? And I think mothers have clairvoyance, and lovers have clairvoyance, and artists have clairvoyance, but they don't have clairvoyance like Rudolf Steiner or Swedenborg or whatever else. But I think it's just all these different, is a range. And I think we cause a lot of trouble for ourselves thinking that it is or it isn't. It's probably not like that. Then he finishes, and I'm finishing with where, we could have started, namely his plea for reverence. If you want spiritual knowledge, and this is right in the middle, at the beginning of how to know higher worlds, reverence and humility, over and over. And we should be checking ourselves, and we should be not listening to people who don't have it. They may have knowledge, but they don't have adequately spiritual knowledge if they don't have reverence. And so sometimes students will say to me, well, how do you know if any of these people that we study or talk about have any of this? I said, well, a good beginning test is reverence and humility. And that's what Rudolf Steiner had in relation to the divine, not in relation to some egomaniacal philosophers, but in relation to the divine. He was reverent and he was humble. He was a servant. So he finishes. He says, can I find it? He emphasized that the important impulse leading to the goal of our endeavors is the feeling we have when we confront great spiritual truths, or a great spiritual place, or a great spiritual being. When I met the Dalai Lama, I cried. I couldn't talk. He was talking to me, but I couldn't talk back. And I looked around the room, and here are these quite prominent people crying, one after another. This is called numinous. Numinous means above the head. And when you shouldn't shout in a church or a temple or a mosque, well, you shouldn't shout in front of the Dalai Lama. You should bow your head. All right. So that's what he's trying to tell us. I think it's wonderful advice.
Something that struck me preparing a little bit for your lecture or your presentation or your sharing was Steiner was saying in one of his lectures, he said, now I want you to know that it is possible for an angel to speak through a human being.
Right.
And then he goes on to say, well, an evolved human being. And he brings up then John the Baptist, who didn't just show up on the scene as John, but had incarnations with Isaiah and whatnot to get him there. And when John spoke at certain times, it was actually the angel speaking through John. And at that point, John becomes Maya.
Yes.
And that to me was like, you spoke of clairvoyance, and are we clairvoyant? Well, when we are in a mode of an artistic mode in which something is flowing through us, aren't we on a very primitive level in a certain way in this same relationship that he speaks of with John? And as we exercise it, we are exercising and learning what will be hopefully in 300 years, then a an ability to actually allow the angels to speak through us really effectively.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm confused as to what's in this set of lectures or what's in the other one, but I did read exactly what you're saying about the angel being guiding and kind of embodying John the Baptist. And then Rudolf Steiner says, and John the Baptist was prepared to recognize this. So it's not as though it was happening without his knowing what was happening. He knew that he was being guided by the angel. The one part of the sentence that I guess I regret a little bit is the word Maya. Because in the Indian tradition, it really means unreality. And I think what Rudolf Steiner was saying, and using that word perhaps misleadingly, is that what was coming wasn't dependent on his physical body, that the physical body and what the angel was doing was somehow separate, a little bit like what Rudolf Steiner says about the resurrected Christ, who no, actually before the resurrection, how he could be he could appear to be in one place, but he was actually in another place. That kind of separation. But one of the lessons, just as you said, that we're supposed to work toward, one of the goals we're to work toward is to have our angel speak. Yeah, it's a wonderful description of John the Baptist. John the Baptist emerges, really as one of the two or three most important figures in the whole mystery of Golgotha, along with Lazarus John, who then has a relationship to John the Baptist, and of course Mary Magdalene, and of course the mother, and those great figures that he speaks about. It's really, I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Robert, I just wanted to add something what you said in the beginning. And the negativity also, what is by German in general at that time when Steiner lived and later on, that Buddha was looked at somewhat negative and not life positive. But I think that's sorry, I'm so German right now. So it's really because of Schopenhauer was so strong an influence in Germany. And so in my home where I grew up, I had a big picture of Buddha, and then the next room had a really big picture of Schopenhauer. Yeah, Bruce knows it. Very scary.
Wow, that's...
And so that was for a very long time. And I actually grew up with my father close to the first Buddhist center, Stillhaus, the House of the Stillness, which was founded in 1952. And so then in the 50s, so the first Buddhist community in Hamburg or northern Germany grew. And so it was nice to hear when you said on top afterwards that there are long ways you go through life where you can experience Christ from different points of views, maybe of different cultures. And so I experienced as Buddha in my upbringing as a very loving and deep person who knew about the suffering of humanity and wanted to be like a doctor, help us. And as a child, I really was drawn, and later on too. All my life, actually, I thought I was really guidance when I lived in Japan and around the world. And so it's still partly, I think, seen by many people that Buddhism is something nihilistic, you say, nihilistic?
Yeah,
Nihilistic.
yeah.
And so that's might be true because Buddhism is so rich in many different streams. But when I see Buddhism in America and in Japan, I can't feel that at all. And so I think we have to really see the different ways.
Agreed. I think it might help if when we think about Buddha, think about how many different ways there are, truthful ways to think about Buddha, which is similar to all the different ways to think about Jesus Christ. And, there's the Thomas Jefferson or Emerson, which is Jesus with no Christ.
Yes.
And then, if you go to the great mystics, it's Christ, and you can hardly find Jesus. And the same now with Bruce someday. Bruce and I someday are going to have a conversation about, certainly about Buddha. And so
I hope so.
Siddhartha's Buddha is Gautama, and that's all.
Right.
But when the Mahayana starts, then you get these three bodies. One of the bodies, I think it's the Sambhogakaya body, is hovering at the nativity and is an infinite and eternal being. And Steiner says, yes, he was, not he, but they. We shouldn't say he for Buddha. I don't think we should say she for Sophia. They're not gendered individuals. But anyway, the Buddha is a transcendent being. So the idea of the Schopenhauer having that influence, I think, is absolutely true. Schopenhauer was a tremendously influential philosopher, and not a very cheerful one. And
no.
no. I think there is a way to read him, which is, I think, somewhat stoic. We could say, really everything is really, really, really bad, but with will, we can, it's a kind of early existentialism. With will, we can sort of, get along. But it starts at a very low ebb. Yeah. And people in America don't seem to have any awareness of Schopenhauer, but I know that in Europe, it's very strong.
Very strong in Germany,
yeah. And he cast Buddha in the pessimistic role.
I wonder if you could help me out with something. You mentioned about Christ coming for all people, not just the Christians. I've tried to have conversations with people about this who are Jewish or Buddhist, and I find they're offended, as if I'm trying to push my, Rudolf Steiner's version of Christianity on them. And I come away thinking it hasn't been such a good conversation. And I'm just wondering if we could have a better phrase, or maybe you can advise me what to say. Is there any way that you could help me with this when it comes up?
I share your dilemma. It's a very hard topic. And one of the reasons, as I'm sure you know, that makes it so hard is the sins of Christianity. Christianity has been anti-Semitic since the 3rd century, and often horrifical, violent prejudice, stupidity. And you can't be Jewish and not have that deep in your psyche. So we're coming, those of us who accept Christ are coming from a place that has to begin with apology and understanding, even to get somebody to listen to us for a minute. And then I think what we have to do is try to separate Christ from Christianity, at least with respect to this topic. In another way, Christ and Christianity are completely bound up. For example, anthroposophists seem to me to like to say that anthroposophy is compatible with all religions. Well, I attended a conference at the Gordianum on that topic, and I can say with absolute confidence that the relationship between anthroposophy and Christianity from the various speakers was overwhelmingly positive compared to all of the other ways that anthroposophy is related to Zen Buddhism or Islam or whatever else. So you're trying, I think, to make a case that is historically premature. I think we have to think of it more as an ideal than as something that is achievable in our lifetime. There's just too much really terrible Christian history. And there's quite a lot of anthroposophical dogmatism. Not that we've killed people, but we have been arrogant and contentious. And so that doesn't help. So it's a hard position. You might even wonder whether it's a good idea.
I think maybe if I can, to inject another note, if you read the early chapters of the Gospel of Mark, by the end of the third chapter, his opponents have already resolved to put him to death. So the first 3 chapters, he spends turning everybody's life upside down. Yeah, it's an amazing picture. So there is that in Christ Jesus, which really, in the deepest level, questions a lot of the things that I take for granted. And I don't think we can walk around that. It has to do with who this being is, which is why it's important not to take Jesus away from Christ. Because the Jesus that we meet in the Gospel of Mark, is not a congenial being. He's compassionate, he's deep, but he doesn't leave people at peace within themselves. Doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim or whoever you are. We're just a happy atheist. So it's part of the whole reality of who this being is.